I'm Bob Kelly. I'm a media specialist for the Boeing company. I'd like to give you a demonstration of the instructor-controlled videotape recording system. First thing I'll do is show you a graphic that has a line drawing of the system, and then I'm going to take you on a little tour around the room that I'm in and show you the components from a third camera that's not associated with the system. And then I'll give you a demonstration of a program that's built with the system and show you some of the capabilities. So let's take a look at this graphic first. This is basically how the room is laid out. I'm sitting here behind a desk, and on the desk I have a switcher that I just used to switch from one camera to the other. The camera that I opened with was camera 1. That's this camera looking at me in a medium shot. The camera you're looking through now is camera 2 right here, which is looking down on a 3-ring notebook binder. Camera 2 is mounted on a copy stand, and notice that the camera is turned around from its normal mount. The normal camera mount is right here. However, I've modified the mount so that I am now mounting, on effect, the top of the camera is mounted onto the copy stand. There's a switcher on the desk, and in this case I also have a remote control on the desk, which you'll see later, which allows me to remotely control my tape recorder. So I can switch from two cameras. This is camera 1, which I just switched to, and I can talk to you, and this is camera 2, which allows me to put anything I want under the copy stand and give a demonstration. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a third camera, which is outside in the hallway looking into the room I'm in, and I'll give you sort of a tour of all the components of the room. Okay, now what I've done is I've stopped and done an assemble edit using my remote control box, which is mounted right here on the table, right at my right hand here. I've set up a camera out in the hall which is looking into the room, and you can see the components that are in front of me, which I see when I make the presentation. On the table here I've got a remote control box which is designed to remotely control the tape recorder that I'm using, which is a JVC 8300. We've built this remote control here at Boeing for a special purpose. I'll give you a closer look at that later. I also have on the table a small video switcher. This happens to be a Panasonic WJ530, which is what is referred to as a mini wipe. It allows me to go back and forth between camera 1, which is right in front of me, and camera 2, which is up here in the copy stand. I have a lavalier microphone around my neck, and it's plugged directly into the tape recorder. Let me move out around here and show you the parts we've got now. This is camera 1 right here. This is a camera that's set on the medium shot looking at me. Again, here's a camera 2, which is mounted on a copy stand, and you'll get a closer look later, but notice that we've modified here a mount, so it's actually mounted what would in effect be on its top. Over here is a JVC 8300 tape recorder. This is an editing model which allows us to do the editing with our remote control box. Down below here you notice I've got a monitor so I can see what's going on. I also have one around here on the other side, which is helpful for the viewers, the presenter at certain times. So it's very simple. I've got camera 1, which looks medium shot to the presenter. I've got camera 2, which looks down on a copy stand to an area where I can put materials. I have a tape recorder, which is this happens to be an editing tape recorder. You could use some other kind of tape recorder that had a remote control capability, or you don't even really have to have remote control capability, as I'll explain to you in a little bit. Those two components and an instructor or presenter who sits down back here. Notice on the desk I've got all kinds of notebooks and paraphernalia that I'll be using to show you the capabilities here in a little bit. However, when I'm on the two-camera system, these don't show. The only thing that shows is the medium shot from camera 1 and whatever I've got camera 2 focused on. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to the instructor-controlled system. Just remember that you've been looking in the window, in effect. You're standing in the doorway looking in from a third camera that is not a part of this system. Now at times we do use a third camera in the system. Rather than the mini wipe, we use a little switcher of some type where the instructor can punch camera 1, 2, or 3 for some special purpose. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to the camera 1 and we'll take off from there. Okay, now we're back on camera 1. I'm in the instructor-controlled system. What I want to do now is just show you the graphic that I started off with and just make sure you understand the components I have in the room with me. Now let's take a look at this graphic. Again, what I have is myself seated behind a table with a switcher and also a remote control box that allows me to edit with my tape recorder. I have camera 1, which is looking at a medium shot at me. I have camera 2, which is looking at this graphic you're seeing right now. Off here in the corner somewhere, I have my VTR on a cart. These are the components I'm working with. Makes it very simple, very easy. They're easy to move around, easy to set up in different locations. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a little visual tour of the components, again, with a third camera. Okay, so stand by and I'll just show you all the parts in close-up form. Okay? What you see now is, just imagine yourself standing behind the instructor who is seated at the table, and you're now looking over his shoulder. And let me just sit down there now so you can get that perspective. I'm the instructor, I'm sitting behind the table. I have camera 1 in front of me, pointed straight at me. And above this is the graphic you were seeing right here. And up here is camera 2, up above my hand. Now what I've got is I have a control box here, which gives me all the remote control functions, which allows me to edit with the VTR. And here I have my little mini wiper, or my switcher, that allows me to switch from camera 1 or camera 2. Now this could be any kind of switcher. We happen to use this one, which allows us to just wipe back and forth between the two. Now let me stand up here and I'll just sort of point the camera around. You can see some other things. I'm just going to tilt up here to the camera that's mounted on the copy stand. You notice now that you can see some pipe strap arrangements that we've used to mount the camera backwards here. Let me step over there. This is just plumber's pipe strap. This is the first camera we experimented with, and that's why it's in this condition. We're going ahead now and building a little better mount. This is the normal mount here for the tripod. Let me just tip it a little bit so you can see it. This is on the copy stand. I mean, whatever you would mount any camera right here, this is a normal 1/4 inch 20 thread screw. We've mounted the camera this way, which makes the camera see the visual right side up in relation to the viewer or the operator as well. Let me just point the camera out towards camera 1. I'll zoom back a little bit here. There's my videotape recorder and camera 1 on the left. Now you can also see some of the junk in the back of my studio. But on the left is camera 1, which is pointed straight at the instructor. On the right is the JVC 8300 editing videotape recorder. I also have a couple monitors underneath to allow the instructor who is using the equipment to see what is actually being recorded on camera as he's working around. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to the system itself and show you some of the things it can do with normal everyday components. Okay, now what I've done is I've switched back to just the 2-camera system with the switcher in between. What I'm going to do now is show you some samples of how an instructor might use this system. I think what I'll do is I'll just start with what the beginning of a show might look like, or the beginning of some type of presentation. Let's just take a look. There may be some sort of a graphic here. Now, again, this is nothing more than graphics on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper mounted in a 3-ring binder. I'm just about to flip down the next graphic. This might be the title to my show. There's possibly my name, just so the student or the viewer would know that he is watching the right tape. Here comes the next one. This could be tape 12, which might be a portion of, or tape number 12 out of a larger portion of some program I'm doing. I may then come back onto the camera, pick up a textbook, remind the students that this is the textbook we're using and we should be in Chapter 5 for this lesson. Also take care of any other housekeeping arrangements. I may want to talk about homework if I've had students do homework before they come back to this session, or so on and so forth. I may then say, okay, let's take a look at the objectives for tonight, and we switch over. Again, I'm bring down the next visual, and notice that several techniques can be used that are very similar to overhead transparencies. You can use progressive disclosure to show one point at a time to help guide the student. You can also stick your hands and fingers in there, or you can stick in a pen to point to things you want to look at. Now I put this visual in because it's sort of marginal. The type is just almost too small. But notice what happens if I want to guide your attention to the upper left-hand corner. I can zoom in. I have control of the zoom. I also have control of the focus. If it does get a little out of focus, I can touch up the focus. There's out of focus. and back to focus. So I do have control of the zoom on the overhead camera. I might talk about this at great length. I might want to put a formula here for you to remember if it has something to do with this particular portion of the demonstration. As I move to some other portion of this drawing, I would always zoom back first and let you see the whole drawing before I zoom in, so you can keep yourself oriented. Very possibly the student would have this drawing also in his handout if it's at all complicated. I would never try to show a drawing of this complexity and this small a type as a whole and assume a student could see it or understand it. Let me just show you some of the other kind of things that can be put under this camera. Now here's just a normal black and white photograph. Let me stick that under there and let's see what it looks like. Notice I've got a little bit of a glare problem, and I can usually work this by tipping it around a little bit. Again, let me zoom in on something. This happens to be a black and white photograph of the Learning Center here at Kent. I can also control my f-stops if I need to help myself out. And typical black and white photograph. Notice I have a little glare problem there. Matte finish on these photographs helps quite a bit. This is one part of our Learning Center where we prepare graphics. Notice how I can zoom in. I always come back to show the student the whole perspective before I would zoom in on this room here, which is in effect is a room we use for storyboarding and preparing visuals. Okay, so now there's a black and white photograph. Let me try a color photograph. Here's a color photograph. Again, now this is a matte finish, so the glare problem is not as bad as a whole, but notice the lights and the overhead do show here, and I need to sort of tilt it to take care of it. There's just a classroom scene, so color photographs work well. Let me try now a color Xerox. This is a color Xerox, in other words, a Xerox picture from a slide in color by color Xerox 6500 process. Copy from a slide, it is in color, it shows up pretty well. I can zoom in here again if I need to, and notice that I can focus, zoom back. This is a picture of an instructor doing a very similar thing as I am doing right now. However, he is in a classroom and his overhead camera is mounted in the ceiling, and it is looking down on the notebook which is in front of him, which he is using for a blackboard. His hand is on a switcher, which he is using to switch back and forth between camera 1 and camera 2. Same type of arrangement, but in a classroom situation. Now let me just try a brochure here. I've got a brochure on a camera, ENG camera. Let's just stick that under there and use some of these pictures and some of these line drawings and see how they turn out. Let's just say I wanted to show this picture. Very nice. Turns out very nice. It's a color picture. Let me touch up the f-stop there a little bit and play with it and just show you. I have that control. If I wanted to come in here and talk about this microphone that's mounted on the side, I can do that. I can put a pointer in here. I can talk to you about that. Down at the bottom there are some interesting line drawings. Let's just see how well they hold up. Notice the type is very unreadable, but if I want to zoom in here, touch up my focus, not too bad. I could probably discuss this with you if you also had a copy of the same visual. Let me open this up and see what's on the inside. Here's some just type. Let me zoom down on some typical, this is probably about 10-point type. Notice that it's not too bad, but this distance from here to here is about 1.5 inches, and that's about maximum that you could use. The word general is in bold, and that cap is probably about a 12-point cap on the G. Here's some other color photos. Let me just go over to those so you can take a look. Let me move down on this one. Notice I'm getting a little glare problem there, which I should be able to work just by tipping the camera, or tipping the... Yeah, there we go. In other words, I've just taken it and very carefully tipped up the graphic I'm working with. Okay, so those are some of the things you can use to put under the camera. Now, some of the other things you can do is, if you have a textbook, let me just take this textbook, which I showed you earlier. This happens to be on the 727. It's got line drawings and photographs in it. Let me just put that onto there and show you how that turns out. Let me go and take a look here at, here's one. Let's just say we wanted to talk about a thing called a ground interconnect valve. Now I'm controlling all this zooming here and all the focusing. I'm doing that myself. The ground interconnect valve is located on the right wheel well of the airplane. And this is what the ground interconnect valve looks like. Here's a line drawing. If this is what I have to work with, maybe I want to talk about some problems that the maintenance people have been having or something, I could come in here and I could point at certain things, discuss how these should be done. Now let me just zoom back here and then I'm switch to a photograph of the same object. This is about an 80-line screen for people who know what that means in printing, similar to a newspaper, not a very fine photograph. Notice as I zoom all the way in, you can actually see the cross-hatching in the printing of the dot pattern here. Now if I zoom back though, however, this isn't too bad. I could probably use this visual if I wanted to as an example of what the valve looks like while it is in the airplane. One other thing I might do is if I had some sort of a component like this one that I wanted to show the student and take a look at and actually part of the airplane or part of whatever you're dealing with, I can stick that under there and let me show you what that looks like. Let me just zoom all the way in on this now. Let me focus. This happens to be a bunch of solder connections on the end of a cup of some type. Notice I can get a pretty good focus and I can control the amount of zoom. My depth of field isn't too great here. I can control that. Also, if I need more magnification, I can use more diopter lenses on the end of this lens and give me a pretty good show here on what this looks like. If, say, for example, I was discussing good and bad solder joints or good and bad wire techniques or something. There's one more thing I want to show you. Sometimes when we have a fairly informal presentation, you might want to just draw your visuals by hand. And to do that, we work on a 3-ring binder again, but we work in the upper right-hand corner of a page, and we work in a 3-inch by 4-inch area, say right aspect ratio for TV, and we draw them by hand. The reason we use the very small area is that capital size printing is about the right height, and if we use a nice bold pen, we get about the right stroke width, and it holds up pretty well. Now let me switch to this notebook, and I'll show you what it looks like. This is the old stuff here. Let me get that moved out of the way. Now, here's a notebook which I'll use, and notice here's my visual. Let me touch that up. It's very well marked up right now. I've been using it for demonstrations. But here's my 3-ring binder. Down here in the lower left-hand corner, I have my notes, so I'm sort of infinitely knowledgeable about what I want to say. And I'll set this up for you. Let me just flip back here. This would be used for a fairly informal presentation. This might be my title. This might be my objectives. I can go ahead and talk about the objectives. I can stress them with a point. I can, underline. I can do things like this so you won't forget what I feel the most important points are. Also, if I need to, again, I can put some sort of formula down here. Whatever is appropriate for the instruction. Again, now I'm working in a 3 by 4 inch area, just in the upper right-hand corner of a paper. I've got these mounted in sequence in the notebook so that I can flip to the next one as it's required. Also, I'm working with a piece of paper that allows me to put my notes in the bottom left-hand corner or anywhere in the paper other than the visual, so I'm sort of infinitely knowledgeable. The only thing that's on camera is myself in the 3 by 4 inch area on the paper. This pretty well wraps up all the components of the system and gives you a good idea of how you can set one of these things up. I think the last thing I'll do is just, again, show you the components with my little drawing here to give you an idea of all the things you've seen. This is just a reminder of the components of the system. I'm seated behind the table. On that table I have a switcher. I also have a remote control for the tape recorder, which I've just used to make an assemble edit. I have a camera mounted on a copy stand, pointed down at a 3-ring binder where I put papers or photographs or whatever I need. I also have a camera out here, camera 1, which is pointed at me in a medium shot. I can switch between these two cameras as required to make my presentation. When I want to look at the audience, I switch to this camera and look right at the camera. When I want to look at my graphics, I switch to this camera. I can put other things under the camera like components of machinery or whatever I happen to be talking about. I also can put such things as photographs, line drawings from brochures and booklets and so on. This concludes the demonstration on instructor-controlled videotape presentations.